welcome to the OxAI podcast. I'm your host, Jessie, from the Oxford Artificial Intelligence Society. Today, we're extremely thrilled to welcome Professor Kristin Persson to join the show. Professor Persson is a pioneer scientist in the forefront of computational material science. She's the director of Materials Project at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, a groundbreaking initiative that is revolutionizing how we discover and design new materials by providing open access computational data to researchers around the world. She's also a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Her work sits at the intersection of physics, chemistry, machine learning, and sustainable technology. From accelerating battery innovation and advocating open science, her impact spans both academia and industry. Welcome to join us today, Kristin.
Thanks so much, Jessie. I'm happy to be here.
Let's get started with the icebreaking question then. As a distinguished physicist and a material scientist, your contribution to computational material science and open source community has been transformative. What initially drew you to this field?
It's a really good question. You might be disappointed to hear that I didn't grow up dreaming of being a material scientist. When I was sort of 18, 19 years old, and in Sweden, I grew up in Sweden, you have to choose your direction of where you're going. And I looked at engineering physics and the engineering things, and then I also thought about becoming a doctor. And my mom told me that you should absolutely become an engineer because you are not a doctor. And of course, I had to do exactly the opposite of what my mother said. So I started in med school, and I did a year in med school until I realized that she was right. So I switched to engineering physics, did my master's thesis on neutrino oscillations, so quite far from material science. But then I realized that, okay, that was a little theoretical. You just derive equations and there's, a little bit of computer, but I felt I needed more computers in my life. So when I interviewed different professors for my PhD, I interviewed people that was as different as material science, computational material science, general relativity, mechanical properties, and optimization theory. And I ended up choosing the one, not because I thought all those 4 topics were super interesting and I could have gone anywhere, but I ended up choosing material science because I could see myself or recognize myself in the people in the group. So I chose it for the group, the people, rather than the topic itself.
It sounds like it comes from such a diverse background, different fields, and then maybe you can combine, I guess this choice kind of makes you combine all different backgrounds into future research as well.
Maybe I'm just a bit, I just like different things. I'm interested in many different things, and I think I've always liked to hang out with people who have the same mindset, who are interested in many different things. So my group right now, and I think the group I built here at Berkeley, is very interdisciplinary. It likes data science, it likes machine learning, it likes material science, it wants to make an impact on sustainable energy. There's the whole software engineering aspect to it. So I think that's always been part of me. So I had a hard time choosing. I had no idea what I wanted to do. It's a very simple, short answer to your question.
I guess this is what happens to most of us most of the time.
Yeah, a little bit of a sort of a tortuous way towards where you end up in life.
Exactly. I guess this cross-domain collaboration is actually what brings out a big project, a bigger impact as well.
Yeah, I think so. The Materials Project is a highly interdisciplinary project, and it benefits from having people with these well-rounded interdisciplinary interests. So people who do data, people who do software engineering, people who are very interested in making an impact on materials. So, yeah.
As the founder of this project, did you encounter any organizational or technical challenge at the beginning?
Yes. I was very fortunate that I was surrounded by people who have similar interests. So the little core unit of people who started the Materials Project were all sort of realized that in order to bring this to some sort of success, you had to combine data science, software engineering, and domain science and computational expertise. And that grew into what we currently have at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is 4 engineers that are fully funded by the project. But that wasn't the case in the beginning. In the beginning, we barely had money for one. We had 1 postdoc and a few volunteers. And as the project grew, the recognition within the Department of Energy grew as well. And just a few years ago, they upped their budgets so that we could pay for these 4 software engineers. And that is a crucial piece of the puzzle because you can't keep something like this going without dedicated staff.
So how long did it take you to go from, as you mentioned,
One postdoc. Well, I was essentially 10 years. Yeah, the project is 14 years old now. So about 10 years until I had really the budget to pay for 4 people.
Wow, I was super impressed with the impact you're driving across this long duration.
Thank you. Well, I think you have to stick with things to make them successful. So I think in the early days of the Materials Genome Initiative, which was what originally funded the Materials Project, there were many people who started databases, and that's great, right? And they started computing things faster, and then started delivering that to the public. And a lot of those efforts are still around, but they are more on the sort of academic level. They're like one PI doing it for his group, and that's beautiful. But if you're going to do this for the whole world, if you're going to deliver data to the world, and you constantly innovate on how you present the data, what kind of data you produce, and add then machine learning to it as well, then you sort of have to stick with it. You have to be a bit persistent.
Definitely super excited to see more breakthrough from this project. And also you've been a vocal advocate for open science. So why do you think transparency and accessibility in data is so crucial in this field and in general in academia?
Yeah, I am still an advocate of open science and open data, even though I think it's becoming harder than it used to be an advocate for those things. I have seen what happens if you make data available to the general public instead of keeping it in your own group. You become what we call an innovation multiplier. Because then people who have other talents than you do, and your own group does, they end up looking at this data in a different way, and they then take they do other things with it that you would never have dreamt of. And I think that is hugely important to the world. You could obviously say that, no, I just want to keep the data to myself, and it's only going to benefit my group, and we're only going to be the people that sort of can innovate with it. But if you allow the data to be accessible and easily used, downloaded, featureized, educate the people on the accuracy of the data, then they do pretty amazing stuff with it. So one example, which is also speaks to the fact that you don't really know how the data is going to be used always, right? You can't anticipate it always. You think that, oh yeah, I know how I would use this data, and we're publishing on that, but maybe other people have better ideas or other ideas. So in the early days, we made the decision to save all the trajectories. Do you know what a trajectory is of a calculation? No. Okay, I'll explain it. So we calculate things like, crystal structures of materials and molecules, and the trajectory is basically how the implementation of the Schrödinger equation minimizes the energy and gets to sort of zero forces. So that sort of gives you a trajectory of the energy landscape and the force landscape as you find the happy medium of that crystal structure that basically, here's my equilibrium positions. So
you see this equilibrium decision is when the material is the most stable?
In the starting point you gave it, the initial sort of where the atoms are, it can't go too far from that, because then that's very difficult, and it just needs to find sort of within the short range exploration of that potential energy landscape, it can find, yes, the most stable.
That's the trajectory. So that's the trajectory.
And that's the trajectory. And in the early days, we decided to save all that data, the trajectories, not because we thought people were going to do anything fun with it, but more because we wanted to build confidence that the people who looked at our data said, yes, they have found the equilibrium position. It's trustworthy data. But then about 8-9 years into it, right here comes machine learning force fields. And one of the co-PIs and other people in the Materials Project, Professor Ong at San Diego, he says, I can train universal machine learning potential on this data. And that we didn't know in the beginning. That was completely serendipitous in the sense that that data was available. We could have thrown it away. A lot of other people did. And that was the beginning of those.
Oh my God, so lays the groundwork for all this foundation model and machine learning.
Because we decided that data was worth saving, and that was 10 years worth of trajectories.
The trajectory, do you see the trajectory as it's a loss function we're trying to optimize, or sorry, I'm quite...
No worries. It's basically energy force pairs. So it maps out the potential energy landscape of now 150,000 inorganic crystals. Yeah. So you can imagine now I can basically train a learned function that says I can minimize any arrangement of atoms because I know how they how they behave, right? I know where the forces go. I know how the energy depends on the forces. So that's what we call the potential energy landscape.
So once you have like consider this landscape, and then the way is to kind of like find the derivative that gets to the minimum.
Yeah, you basically have now something that, just like the Schrödinger equation, knows the dependence of the energy on the atomic positions, or you can run, a lamps. You can run a sort of a molecular dynamics simulation with this potential that you trained on all this trajectory data.
Wow, that's definitely fascinating. I come from a kind of more machine learning or probability background. Yeah. This is great to know. This is how the problem is constructed in material science.
This is one of the ways that we do machine learning in material science, that we train machine learning force fields on the sort of energy force trajectory data. And again, if we hadn't saved that data, we wouldn't have been doing it. But there are other ways we use machine learning. We calculate properties, and that we can featureize, and we have other kinds of machine learning sort of algorithm. But the force fields typically are trained on trajectory data.
We also saw some of our recent work uses GNN to learn the material property prediction. So so how does GNN come into play then?
Yeah, so let's take an example. If you want to train a graph neural network on, for example, molecules, there's a very simple mapping of the molecule atoms on the nodes of the GNN, and then the bonds are the edges, so you can easily map the geography of a molecule onto the GNN. And then you have your features, right? You have the features of the nodes, that's your atoms, and you have the features of the edge, that's the bond. So that can, for example, is this a cyclic bond? Is what kind of bond? What kind of strength does that bond have? And that's something that is useful to know in molecules, what is the bond that's going to break most easily. So one of the neural networks that we trained was to get information about the bond strength. That's called BondNet, to predict.
I love that name.
Yes. So we ended up having features for the nodes. That was sort of the atom type, maybe the valence state if we knew it. And then we had obviously then features for the bond. And then we had also global features for the molecules, if the molecule is charged. So those kinds of things went into the GNN. And then we trained it on lots of data where we knew, right? We can calculate with the Schrödinger equation, what is the bond strength of these things? And we knew what the atom types were. And then we used that to predict back from molecules that we had never calculated what is the most likely bond to break or to form, which is the same in equilibrium.
So it sounds like it's a direct translation. Would you say it's a good, a direct representation of molecule?
Yeah, it's a very intuitive way of representing a molecule. And because you can form many different relationships between the atoms, right? You can form different kinds of bonds, and that can be represented by the graph.
This might be a dumb question for me. So I would assume the kind of the interaction between different atoms within one molecule to be quite different.
Yep.
And I know you mentioned there are different edges, but how do you map this long and short range interaction?
Yeah, so that is a challenge. Many GNNs sort of cut off, or depending if you do crystals or if you do molecules. In molecules, it's a little better to have what I call localized interactions, because they tend to just have more of those. But in crystals and things like interfaces and many different materials and chemistry questions, we do require knowledge of long-range interactions. And because of the way that we construct these neural networks, they tend to cut off explicit interaction or direct interaction after a few layers of atoms. And that has been a challenge, and people have come up with various ways of fixing it. I don't think it's a solved issue, completely solved yet, but I have a colleague here at Berkeley, Professor Bing-Ching Chen. She just published this year another method of adding long-range interactions to whatever potential you're using. So, it's
This is still a popular research topic.
Yes, certainly still a very popular. It's not. We haven't, what I would say, found the best version, or I haven't tested Bing Chen's latest work, but I think it's still fairly safe to say that it's still an open research question. Yeah.
No problem. That's great to know. Yeah, please share the paper later if it's possible. Yeah. I know, another question is, because there apparently some more many complex systems. How about interfaces, as you just mentioned? Is there any way of modeling them right now?
Yeah, so people do use machine learning force fields that are trained on some amount of data. I would say the problem, there are different kinds of interfaces. There are the ones that are that just have what I would call a non-reactive organizational interface. So for example, if you have two solids, or you have a solid and a liquid, in a solid and a liquid that don't react, you still have the molecule orienting themselves next to the solid. And that is interaction based, and you can model that with, for example, a machine learning force field. You are going to need long-range interactions there because you have things like dispersion forces that tend to be more long-range. Even more challenging, in my opinion, are reactive interfaces. So when the interfaces actually react, they don't just organize themselves. So, for example, solid-state batteries. Have you heard about solid-state batteries? Maybe not.
I heard, but I don't know much.
Okay. So normal batteries that you have in your laptop there or your phone, they use a liquid electrolyte, which is great for the conductivity of the ions that have to go between the two electrodes. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, people started looking into solid-state batteries that where the electrolyte would be solid as well. And you can imagine that the challenge first was just getting the ions to move as quickly in the solid as it would be in the liquid. But they have found such materials, which is very impressive. And the benefit of solid-state batteries would be that they would have higher energy density, so you could drive longer with your car, or you can use your laptop longer, and they also be safer. The problem is with these electrolytes that conduct lithium ions, for example, very fast, they tend to react with a lithium anode. And they start, but it's at room temperature, it doesn't happen very fast, but they developed other phases at the interface. And if you characterize these interfaces, you see how they sort of evolve as time goes by. And if you're unlucky, they create phases at the interface that don't conduct lithium ions, and then it shuts down the battery. So these are really important, and there are many big research endeavors in the United States and elsewhere in the world who are trying to come up with ways of predicting how these interfaces evolve, and that is something that machine learning force fields are used for. Now, this is a solid-solid reaction, so it tends to be slow at room temperature, so it's long timelines, huge unit cells with like thousands of atoms, and that is something that, for example, DFT, the density functional theory, which is what the sort of workhorse from the Schrödinger equation that we use, cannot really do well. So the training data is limited to picoseconds. So now these trajectories that I talked about before, atom force field, atom force pairs, they are limited to 100 picoseconds, but you're going to have to, you want your potential to be accurate for minutes, hours, days.
Yeah, much longer.
Much longer, right? So you can't, so you have to use things like active learning, and you have to run for a bit and then keep retraining your machine learning potential on the fly, because it keeps seeing environment that hasn't been trained on. So that's one of the sort of ways that people are using it today.
Does it mean like while training these models, would you integrate experiment at the same time? So like after some training, we get some feedback from experiment.
Yeah, we are currently in the stage where we are benchmarking these frameworks, I would call them frameworks, these training frameworks on existing experimental data, because the experimental data is very hard to come by, so you can't ask your friendly experimental counterpart to go and measure it this afternoon. It's a lot of work for them, so we tend to use things that are already in the literature to validate that our framework, our active learning loops, or whatever we're doing to sort of keep updating the potential, so it doesn't go out of the training set and start hallucinating and say bad things, because it has no idea what it's supposed to do, right, when it doesn't have any data to train on.
Yeah, very, especially if you're trying to map this like long range, like long time.
Yeah, large unit cells on long time scales that we typically do not access or cannot access with high accuracy.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. I mean, you mentioned it can be hard to integrate model training and experimentation.
Yeah.
Do you see in the future there would be some way to kind of have some autonomous lab that has model training and that experiment at the same time? Would you see this coming at some point?
I think that is the future. So I'm very fortunate that I get to work with a professor here at Berkeley Lab that has built an autonomous lab for solid-state synthesis reactions, and now it's going to be built also for batteries. And he's integrating the materials project and all of our data into their sort of decision-making. When they make decisions within the autonomous loop and the robotics, they're using constantly our data. They're doing machine learning on that data, for example, for characterization. So we have a lot of ways of characterizing where the atoms sit in materials, and we have a lot of that data in the materials project. So they're using active learning to figure out what did I make? Like if you grind two powders together and you heat it up and you characterize it, then you don't really always know what you made, so you have to compare to some reference data, and that is provided by the materials project, for example. The amount of data that they are producing now on the experimental side, so we get more and more validation, so we can go back and test, are our methods okay, is our machine learning and the data we train on, is it accurate? So the way that I have, on the material product side, we have automated computational data, and which leads to machine learning. On their side, they're automating experimental data, so they get now more, both negatives and positives. And as somebody who knows machine learning, you know how important negatives are, right? And unfortunately, if you go to the open literature, we tend to only publish positives. That's why LLMs have issues to some degree.
Yeah, but definitely need like a more comprehensive data that we can't have selection bias, I suppose.
The future is really automating both sides, both the experiments and the computations. And until recently, it was mostly the computations.
This is absolutely fascinating. So you're saying both experimentation and computation, they compensate each other.
They really do. They really, and you can build, and I love seeing the integration, because that is truly using the best of both worlds. And you can also imagine in the future that we can have agents that are on the fly being asked questions that are not just what the existing data, but they go and actually produce it, so we can have calculations that are fired up as you're asking, as the robotics lab is trying to solve a decision or trying to figure something out. So I'm very excited about the future.
This is actually another question from us, because there has been so many discussion about agentic AI. How do you think this agency-based system and AI agents fit into the future of autonomous material discovery? What would be a, how do I say, a good procedure or a good system here?
Well, I think of agents as very similar to humans, in the sense that you really don't want to build a monolithic system that's supposed to do everything, right? We all have our different expertise. So these different agents that are trained to do different things will be very good at what they do, and they can occasionally also compete with each other or challenge each other. So kind of like, the Go player playing against itself, right?
Yeah,
So having individual agents having their own expertise and being trained in different ways, I think is really the way that humans work too, and collectives work. I really think that's how the future is going to be. We're not going to train monolithic things that can do everything. Yes, predict me a crystal, tell me how to synthesize it, then make it, and then, so, you're going to have one agent for each of these things, right? And they may not always agree.
And you might have orchestration.
Yeah, so you now have to figure out, and so these workflows need to be modular, and they need to be flexible, because you don't always want to call. Sometimes you don't know from the beginning whether you're going to call this agent or another one, right? It depends on the outcome.
So how far do you think we are from this agent-based system?
Well, we're already seeing parts of it. I was part of a collaboration here at Berkeley that was doing a system of agents to discover new metal organic frameworks. These are porous materials that can absorb, for example, CO2, or they can even be quantum materials for quantum computers and stuff like that, or quantum sensing. And the team was another professor, Professor Omar Yagi, and some professors from the computer science division, and then me, and a postdoc, and a couple of other people as well. And it was beautiful to see how the first author of the paper, the guy who was sort of doing the whole thing, he constructed this sort of number of agents, and a couple of agents were LLMs. They were producing plausible structures and plausible chemistries. But then they had a diffusion agent that basically made sure that the atoms or the chemistries that they had been dreaming up were more reliable. And then they had quantum mechanical agents that tested these to see, are they actually decent? So
as a critique.
So, right. And then they had a synthesis as the agent that decided, based on heuristics from the literature, which kind of sort of MOFs have been synthesized in the past successfully. So it has some heuristics, it has some rules. So it removed some candidates that didn't seem particularly easy to synthesize. And then we had humans in the loop. We had a bunch of experimentalists looking at them and saying, yeah, I don't want to try that one, but that one looks really interesting, and I never would have thought it myself. So in the end, we had this sort of system of agents that dreamt up a range of metal organic frameworks, materials, and then they went out and made them, completely new materials.
This is absolutely cool. So you have like agents like diffusion agent that kind of demonstrates the idea, and then there are critics, and it sounds like there's also a filtering process to find, like either by human or this system.
Exactly.
Right.
And all of these agents have different expertise and are trained in different ways on different data, and they sort of all work together.
Wow, I just can't believe it's so close to us. It sounds like the future.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is a very exciting time to be in this field because it is making huge strides every single day. So you're seeing, it really is a bit of a revolution, to be honest.
Well, definitely excited to see more paper or more like product coming out from this.
I'm sure. And there are many people in the world working on it. So we're just one part of it. But yeah, it's very exciting.
This is super exciting. For the interest of time, we'll just so we have a fun question for you. So like, if you have access to unlimited computational power and data, what scientific question would you love to tackle?
That's a hard one.
Just
there are many things.
Too many questions.
I suppose I'll stay with material sciences. That's what I know the best. What would I do? Well, so I don't actually work on this, but because I know how hard it is. But if I imagine a room temperature superconductor that would save us an enormous amount of electricity and an enormous amount of money. So today we transmit electricity in our normal transmission lines, right? I think the losses are something in the order of 10%.
Oh, I didn't know it was this high.
Yeah, it's huge. So we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in energy, right? And as we are using more and more electricity, and our transmission grid would be a game changer for the world. So a room temperature superconductor, that's what I would go for if I had unlimited compute.
This is great to know. That would like save so much, like for sustainability, energy, and like money as well.
Yeah. No resistivity, no resistive losses.
I mean, hopefully this comes to us soon.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a very hard problem. People have been working on it for a while, and every 5 years or something, we have a material we think is it, and then it turns out it's something else. So it's a very difficult problem.
Maybe with the new agentic system,
who knows?
We might be able to discover it sooner.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hopefully. One last question from us. Many of our audience are like aspiring researchers in different fields. What advice would you give to these young scientists?
Enjoy it, be curious, don't be afraid. I know that in academia especially, we're all told to sort of be very narrow and to drill deep, and deep is of course important, but I think a lot of the innovation today lies on the interdisciplinary, on the interfaces of all these very traditional sciences. So in between chemistry and software and machine learning, in between physics and material science. As long as you have time in your life, before you have children maybe, because they tend to take a lot of time, explore all these different disciplines and learn from them all.
Thank you so much for the advices. Well, this brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for your time today, Kristin, and your insights.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. And to the audience, if you like this episode, please share, subscribe, and stay curious. Until next time. You got it?